here with Conrad Whyte of the Merrimack College men's soccer program for the NEC Champions for Change initiative. And Conrad, thank you for being here. And just to start, as part of this, can you just discuss from your background how you've experienced racism personally and its impact on you?
Thanks for having me, Mike. I've not experienced racism in a big way since I moved to the country in 2010. But there were some small things that happened at the time that I really didn't think about as much. One of those things being, being a club soccer coach, you would go to these places to play matches, and you would find that you're going through the line after the game, shaking hands, and there was one or two players that would skip your hand. They'd shake everybody's hand, they get to your hand, and rather than high-fiving, they'd skip over it, and then they'll get the person at the back of you. And it happened a few times, and, I really never paid it any mind. I just thought it was maybe sour grapes because the kids weren't happy. But then it happened a few times, and it was like, okay, you start seeing a pattern. And you start seeing that, this is what it is. So being the person that I am, I just took it in stride, and I just moved past it. Another situation I had was I was in a state and I stopped at a gas station to get some gas and some other things and the cashier would not touch my hand to give me my change. They literally threw the money at me, and it was like okay, if that's how it has to be. So I just walked out. I paid and I walked out. I left my change. I just left.
And especially with everything going on recently, what are your thoughts on the development of the Black Lives Matter movement, and really the protesting and the fight, nationwide in our country going on right now, and this effort to enact change and to end racism in this country?
I think the biggest thing right now is that people are actually listening. I think there's a certain level of inclusion. If you watch what's happening. It's not just Black Lives Matter, and it's a bunch of Black people or colored folks or Black and brown folks that are attending these things. You have our brothers and sisters that are not necessarily of color, and so it rings the bell and it says, listen, it's a time for change. People are not standing for the nonsense anymore. It's time to have inclusion. It's time to have a real conversation about racism and how it's affecting living, breathing individuals who have the same blood as you do, who die as you do, who does the things that you do. And so it's important to understand that, big corporations, companies, universities, all these places are now making changes. They're now looking at policies. They're trying to ensure that there's a level of decency, there's a level of inclusion, there's a level of subtlety and understanding and solidarity that's going on in the world today. So it's really huge. I think the biggest part of it is that we are now, as being Black and brown folk, we are not alone in this fight.
And how do you hope this time in our country will lead to positive change in our world?
It's actually it's funny because it's actually led to it. It started. I mean, you look around. You look at the German Bundesliga that has just started up again. You look at what's happening over there. You look at what's happening in England. With the Black Lives Matter movement, what the players are doing before games, the players and the coaches and the staff and the groundsmen and everybody. And so now it's a worldwide thing where people are not going to just sit around anymore and say, it's happened, let's move on, let's be the bigger man. Yes. But however, we are now seeing that real erosion of all the things that we have held this thing in for a very long time. And so now, because of the camaraderie around the world, you're looking at France, you're looking at all these other countries, and you're seeing what's happening over there. You're looking at the protests, mm-hmm. And you're seeing that these are huge. And then you look at the makeup, you look at the demographics, and you see this movement is not something that's gonna stop anytime soon. And so I think that we're making a huge impact on what's happening around the world.
For you personally, do you have any? You mentioned a couple of things at the beginning of this, but any stories that you'd like to share regarding the fight for change recently, potentially from protests you may have attended, or anything else going on at the moment?
So I live in Quincy, which is a predominantly white community. So most of my friends are white, and so we have these real conversations. There are people that have been around for the last 10 years and have been around me for the last 10 years. I've gone to their homes. They've come to my home. My kids have played with their kids. And so we have these conversations about, what can they do to help? What can they do to help? And I'm always telling them the same thing. Have the real conversations, have the tough conversations. Make sure that you're having these conversations with your kids, you're having them with your friends, you're having them with me, because only a person who is in it knows how to deal with it. I mean, at the end of the day, you can sympathize with me, but at the end of the day, the idea is I have to tell you how it feels. I have to be able to have an honest conversation with you without you feeling a sense of anxiety or a sense of, I really wish I wasn't having this conversation, because that's the only way things are going to change. You have to have the real tough conversations, but you can't go forcing it on people as well. They have to reach out to you and say, how do you feel about this? How do you, how do I handle this? What happened in this way? And so for me, it's just having those real conversations with people who really wants to have those conversations. As far as the protest goes, my family is, we have diabetes in my family, prostate. My dad died of prostate, and we have these underlying conditions that would make us very vulnerable to COVID right now. Mm-hmm. So I have to be very aware of what's going on with my family. And so I haven't really been to the protest because I don't want to have to be, figuring out how do I deal with my family after that. But, I've been watching, I've been paying attention. I've been having lots of conversations. The good thing for me is that I run a club here in Quincy. So I'm in constant contact with families and parents and over 300 parents that I have to be in contact with on a daily basis. So, there's a level of comfort in having these conversations.
And, to a great transition into the world that we're in of sports. And you talked about, you brought up the Bundesliga, what's going on in the Premier League, and how sports can be just a symbol of camaraderie, togetherness, and things of that nature, and how the role of sports, whether it's at Merrimack and the NEC or as we've, worldwide, it's such a powerful vehicle of change potentially. And, how do you think that, the sport that you coach of soccer and just sports in general can be a vehicle of change right now?
Well, I think the first thing about this has to be leadership. I think that we, the tough conversation is, I don't think that there's enough people of leadership in color. Of color in leadership. I think that, to have a meaningful conversation about something means that I have to have a conversation with someone who has felt it, who understands what it is to feel that way. So when you look around, you look at the landscape of our league, you look at the colleges, you look at how things are structured. It's very difficult to have a certain conversation with someone who doesn't understand where you're coming from. And I think that the first thing we have to do is find people of color that not to give handouts, but people of color that are qualified, that tick all the boxes, and bring them to the table. Let them have a meaningful conversation about the way we go about changing things, the way how we change, the way how we do the things that we do. Then that will trickle down onto the field where you now have the camaraderie between the players, that can have that meaningful conversation. The players, they're together a lot of the times. They travel on buses together. They stay in rooms together. They won't be the conversations won't be so difficult because those guys are in the foxhole together. They're doing things together. They're working hard together because we're part of a team sport situation. But I think the basis has to be people of color. More people of color have to be in leadership roles so that we can have that trickling effect trickling down.
And then lastly, Conrad, just to, of everything you've talked about, is there anything else, you'd like to add, anything else you'd like to share about the fight to end racism?
Yes. So for me, how do we get the pursuit of a more equitable world? Okay. For me, it has to be, there has to be some solidarity around the world. It has to be, it's going to take a lot of solidarity. Just put it that way, for us to have a more equitable world. For me, it was never about Black Lives Matter or about all lives don't matter. Mm-hmm. That's not what it was about for me. For me, it was about what was happening to Black people in our communities and for the fight for change of equality and inclusion and to show that racism cannot be acceptable and will not be acceptable. It was never just about Black Lives Matter for me. It was about all those other things that made us, made us have to do what we're doing now in terms of the protests and the marches and all that stuff. It was always about that for me, and never just Black Lives Matter. It can't just always be about Black Lives Matter and all other lives doesn't matter. It's never been that. It's just what's been happening to us in the communities, and that reeks of something that is not good.